comes to the creation of the universe, we see over in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, where it states, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now, in the original language, it actually does say "in a beginning," because that's not the very first thing that God actually did. We see in other passages of scripture that he had created the spirit beings prior to this. So here in Genesis chapter 1, we have God creating the heavens and the earth. He stretched them out, kind of like pitching a tent, is the way that it describes this over in Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 5. And God created the earth to be inhabited. That was the whole intent of this creation. We see over in Isaiah chapter 45 and verse 18 where it says, "For thus says Jehovah, who created the heavens, who is the God who formed the earth and made it, who established it, not in emptiness, he created it. He formed it to be inhabited. I am Jehovah, and there is no other." So when the earth was actually created, it was actually created to be inhabited, and it was inhabited by Lucifer. Lucifer was a cherub, more specifically the ruling cherub. Now, because of what he has done, we actually know him as Satan today. But prior to this, when God had created the universe and he placed Lucifer upon the earth, this was where Lucifer's throne was at. In Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 13, where it says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God." Now, at this time, it goes on to describe this garden as a rock garden, a garden of precious stones. Of course, it would not have been a vegetable garden like God created for man, because spirit beings do not need to eat like we do. So prior to the creation of man, we have here on the earth, Lucifer actually ruling from the earth in a garden of stone. And like I said, he was the anointed cherub who ruled over God's creation. And we see in Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 14, where it says, "You are the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were in the mountain of God." And of course, the mountain of God there would be a reference to the government of God. And being anointed, he was placed into a special place of privilege. In Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 16, it goes on to explain what happened and why Satan lost that position. Because through the abundance of his trading, he became filled with violence. And that violence they were talking about is more of a passive violence. Because what did he do? He started to peddle independence from God. And he peddled this to the other spirit beings. He was lifted up in his heart, Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 17, because of his beauty, and he became corrupt in his mind. And we see over in Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 13 that what happened was Satan decided that he was better than being one who was just upon this little rock, Eden. He wanted to be up in the third heaven where God was at. He wanted to be like God. So he attempted to move his throne up there, and as a result of that, Satan lost his position, and God judged the earth. He flooded it. And this is where we see in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2, "And the earth was empty and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters." So God created the earth to be inhabited. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2 is not talking about the formation of the earth. It's talking about what happened after Lucifer sinned and God judged him and took away his position of authority within his government. So now we actually have an earth that isn't doing what it was intended to do. It is a wasteland at this point. And you'll also notice that darkness is upon the face of the deep, which does actually tell us that there's light in the area, but it's not upon the face of the deep anymore. It's not down where the earth and the stones are at, because God is not allowing Lucifer to actually use that light to make himself look more attractive, because that's what he was doing at the beginning. Now it is void and empty, and the Spirit of God is actually brooding over it. And that term brooding means to protect it. He's not allowing any spirit beings upon it, because God's about to do something different. And this is where we get the renovation of the earth, where he is now going to make it possible for us as humans to actually reside upon this earth.